Hello, boys and girls. Yesterday's coffee mug was of loons from northern Wisconsin, and here's today's. If you look closely, it's another Yellowstone one, and it had a picture of a bison on it. It's hard to tell anymore. I think it got worn away in the dishwasher. So that's today's mug. All right, so today we have chapter 11, Study Buddies. Tabitha's mom looked like a regular mom, even though Tabitha said she wasn't her real one. Tabitha called her Carol. "I've been looking forward to this all day," said Carol, with a smile that showed she meant it. I liked her enthusiasm. "You'll have to show me how to take care of Humphrey. I've never had a hamster before." "It's a snap," I squeaked. "I think Humphrey's trying to tell us something," Carol said. Smart lady. Once we were home, Carol set my cage on the table and made some hot chocolate. "How was your day?" she asked. Tabitha shrugged her shoulders. "Just like any other day." If only she knew. She opened her backpack and pulled out some papers. "I've got some math homework." Carol examined the paper. "Honey, this isn't yours. It belongs to someone named Seth Stevenson." Tabitha grabbed the study guide. "We must have switched." She rummaged around in her backpack and pulled out another study guide. "Hang on, this one's mine." She showed Carol the study guide with her name on it. "Is this important?" asked Carol. "Very," said Tabitha. "Very, very, very," I couldn't help squeaking up. "Seth will need this. We'd better try to call him," Carol said. It looked as if things were working out according to my plan, but you never can be sure with humans. Seth and his mom arrived the next morning. "Thank you for calling," said Mrs. Stevenson. "Seth was in a panic when he couldn't find his homework." "It took me a while to get your number. I finally called Mrs. Brisbane," Carol explained. "I'm sorry we never met before. I didn't even know there was a new girl in the class," Seth's mom said. Seth and his mother, whose name is June, I found out, took off their coats, and Carol made hot chocolate again. "I'm so happy to meet somebody from Tabitha's class," said Carol. "Did Tabitha get invited to Richie's birthday party?" June asked. Carol shook her head. "I'll call his mom. She invited everyone in the class, but I'll bet she didn't know about Tabitha either. I'm sorry no one called to welcome you. We'd love to have you at the parent-teacher meetings." Carol poured out the steaming chocolate. "I'd like that. I'm kind of new to the mother business." "Looks like you're off to a good start," said June. The two mothers moved into the living room while Seth and Tabitha sat by my cage. Smiley the bear lay on the table. "Hey, Humphrey," Seth greeted me. I spun on my wheel to show him I was happy to see him. "If Richie invites you to his party, will you go?" he asked Tabitha. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe." Seth rubbed his nose. "Well, if you do, could you leave Smiley at home?" Tabitha looked surprised. "Why?" Seth sighed. "Well, I know you're not weird, but the other kids think you are because of the bear. If you'd leave him at home, they'd know you're, regular, like them. Then they'd like you." Tabitha thought it over. "Are you going to be there?" "Sure. Richie says he's planned a cool surprise." Tabitha frowned. "I don't like surprises." "This will be a good surprise, a great surprise," said Seth. Tabitha didn't answer right away. "Okay, if you'll be there, I'll come, and I'll leave Smiley at home." Seth looked relieved. "Great!" They watched me spin on my wheel and talked about the math test. After a while, Tabitha said, "The basketball game's on. Want to watch it?" The two of them raced out of the room, and I didn't see them again for the rest of the afternoon. June went home, but Seth stayed, and she picked him up later. I didn't care because I wasn't worried anymore. Tabitha left Smiley on the table next to my cage. He seemed to be smiling even more than usual. It looked as if a nice, shiny, silver friendship had begun. I felt warm inside all weekend, especially when Seth called Tabitha on Sunday night to ask her some questions about math. But it was cold, cold, cold on Monday. Shivering, quivering cold. It was even chillier if you were standing near Heidi and Gail. Even when she wasn't around Heidi, Gail hardly ever giggled anymore. Then came Tuesday, the day of the big math test. It was probably the quietest day of the year, as my classmates were very serious about this test. Kirk groaned a few times during the test. Seth got up 3 times to sharpen his pencil. Everyone seemed glad when it was over, especially me. Aldo was unusually quiet that night, too. Instead of talking to me while he ate, he spent a lot of time writing in a big notebook. Sometimes he'd stop to stare at me and then go back to writing. It started to snow on Thursday. When the students got to class, they were all bundled up in heavy hats and scarves, and they all had red noses. A few of those noses were runny, I'm sorry to say. After class began, Mrs. Brisbane rubbed her hands together as if they were still cold. "I have finished grading your math test," she announced. "Every single grade went up, most of them a lot. I know how hard you all worked, and I'm proud of you. Now we can get back to preparing for the poetry festival." When she handed the test back, there were sighs of relief this time and not one groan. "Now I have a big surprise for you. Today we're going to have a guest teacher." "Is that like a substitute?" asked Heidi. Of course, Mrs. Brisbane reminded her to raise her hand. "No, he's coming in to teach one class, and many of you already know him. It's Aldo Amato." "You mean my uncle, Aldo?" asked Richie. "Yes, your uncle, Mr. Amato," said Mrs. Brisbane. And there he was at the door. Aldo had become Mr. Amato. He wore a white shirt, a red vest, dark pants, and a plaid tie. He looked almost as spiffy as Principal Morales, and his cleaning cart was nowhere in sight. "Come on in," Mrs. Brisbane said. "Thank you, Mrs. Brisbane," Aldo stammered. It might have been cold outside, but Aldo was sweating. I was pretty nervous myself. He turned to the students and said, "Hi, folks. I spend a lot of time in this classroom when you're not here, so it's nice to see real people sitting in these chairs for once." A good-looking group, I must say. A few students chuckled, and Aldo relaxed a little. "I was talking to my pal Humphrey the other night, and I started thinking about what the world looks like from his point of view. I mean, here he is, a small animal in a room full of much larger animals, namely you." When everyone laughed, Aldo looked a lot more relaxed. "Anyway, Humphrey gave me a funny idea for something we can all try together today." "Who, me?" "Aw, shucks." Aldo held up a pencil. "Can anybody tell me what this is?" "A pencil," answered Heidi. "Oops, hands please," said Aldo. Heidi's hand shot up. "Yes, ma'am," said Aldo. I was impressed. Mrs. Brisbane never called anybody ma'am. "It's a pencil," said Heidi. "Really? What do you think?" Aldo pointed at Pay Attention Art, who was staring up at the ceiling. "Who? Me? What?" Aldo walked towards Art, holding the pencil up. "I ask you, sir, what does this look like?" Mrs. Brisbane never called anybody sir either.